What's there to say when you've lost the person you've looked up to for years? Of course, I am not the only one who lost Dusty. We were all robbed of the gift of his existence that day he met his tragic, untimely death. I will not claim that it was a peaceful one either, in the few days that we had been forced to live without him already. I have seen countless media reports of his demise. They said he died surrounded by his fans, admirers from all over the country. They're not wrong, but the way they present it is so romanticized that I don't even know whether to laugh or cry at the morbidity of these implications. Dusty truly did die surrounded by his fans. They trampled him to death. To say that Dusty and I weren't always on the best of terms would be a gross understatement. I loved and hated him at the same time. I kind of wanted to be like him. Before I get into this too much, I should probably tell you who I am and how I knew Dusty. My name is Rogues. I am the lead guitarist for Dusty's band. Yes, we're his band, even now after his death. I think it's safe to say that we'll break up in the near future. And by that I mean tomorrow. But this isn't the place to discuss this. I got into the band because I was friends with Nikki, the keyboardist. So Nikki told me that him and 3 other guys, one of which he immediately referred to as the prodigy child. That was the first time I ever heard of Dusty, right there. We're forming a band. It wasn't supposed to be anything special. At first, we thought all we were ever going to be was a group of hobby musicians who met up in Nikki's garage for some fun jam sessions every now and then. We never thought we'd end up like this. I remember arriving at Nikki's place with my guitar. The others were waiting in his garage already and introduced themselves to me in a friendly, casual manner. There was Nikki, of course, then Jamie, who played the bass, and Marla, who played the drums. Dusty wasn't there yet, fashionably late as always, but he really did make up for it when he arrived. I saw it when he walked in. It was surrounding him like an aura of sorts. He just had this amazing presence, this kind of charisma that made him seem both approachable yet at the same time mysterious and enigmatic. It was in his twinkling sea-green eyes, the lazy smile he so effortlessly gave every person he talked to. But most importantly, his voice. We shook hands and he smiled at me and said, "Your hair would look better if you dyed it red, you know." I was speechless. I sort of wanted to tell him where he could put that kind of advice. But he had already stepped up to our little microphone and others had gotten ready too. So I simply sucked it up, and then Dusty started to sing. His voice was so high, I swear I had never heard anyone else sing like the way he did. In one moment he would be calm and tranquil, and in the next he would be practically screaming. But that was the thing, it sounded absolutely incredible. Long story short, I've had my hair red ever since. He was right though, it does look pretty cool. I think it's safe to say that we, the members of his band, were Dusty's first fans. That was the good times, back then. This is the point where I stopped writing and dropped my pen. It was very late at night, either that or very early in the morning. I hadn't gotten as much sleep as I wanted to. Maybe that was the reason this all seemed so wrong to me. There wouldn't be any attendees at Dusty's funeral. His parents had been dead for years after all. I had heard some friend of his aunts and uncles would come. Some of his friends from outside the band too. Lord knows where there were many left. I wondered just how close they had been to Dusty. Would they know I was lying when I had to tell them all these things? Maybe I could just end the speech there. Talk about the good times only and skip the bad. The thought alone felt incredibly dishonest though. I had been asking to give the speech because, get this, apparently I was his best friend. He said so himself. He asked for it himself. It was odd, like he knew what was going to happen that day. I still had the last messages he'd sent in the group chat right in front of me. I hadn't been able to turn off my phone at all due to them. I felt like I needed to take another look at them every other minute. I had never held a funeral speech before. I tried looking up some basics on what to say. There was the introduction, explaining how you knew the departed. Then retelling some memories and maybe a couple other things you'd learned from that person. What did Dusty ever teach me? He taught me my hair looks better when it's brightly colored. He taught me beer pong. He taught me that just because you spend a lot of time doing what you're supposed to love with someone, that doesn't mean you're their friend. See, that's what confused me about his last message. Dusty used to treat me like shit. He was never nice to me, not even in the beginning. He was decent enough, sure, but he'd lose the occasional snide remark. Plus, whenever I'd make a mistake playing, he'd look over at me and just roll his eyes, which was petty, but still kind of hurtful. When we did our first music video, we had to do everything ourselves. It was far from the polished stuff we put out nowadays, and I doubted most of our fans would even remember it ever existed. We had just decided to take our efforts to social media, so we sat there trying to record and film our singing with hardly any idea of what to do. Nowadays, you have people who are actually good at this kind of thing, obviously. But back then, guess who did Dusty's makeup? I still remember how he glared at me as I was trying to apply cheap eyeliner to his lids. I then took out some red lipstick and held it out for him to see. Do you want to make me look like one of those creepy clowns? I'm gonna scare kids like that. I sighed. I think you wanted to look a little extra. Extra, but not terrifying. How about something you didn't steal from my grandma? I groaned and continued rummaging around my little makeup bag. I didn't even have all that much in terms of lip color. I suggested black, to him only to be rudely rejected. Then blue, to which he called me a word I don't even want to repeat here. That was the first time I talked back to him. All the anger and frustration his attitude had been building up inside me. It came bursting out like someone had opened the floodgates. I yelled at him for 2 minutes straight, tossed the makeup bag into his face and stormed off, angrily flipping him off. I waited in the adjacent room, which, for the record, was Nikki's kitchen, for my pulse to slow down. To my surprise, he came in 2 minutes later, the smile on his face plain blue. Sorry for going off on you like that. I guess I was a bit nervous. I do like blue after all. Back then, I thought this little incident would leave us closer and more amicable, and for a day or so. That was the case, until we got into our next argument. The truth is that, despite my admiration for his voice, Dusty and I weren't on good terms. We simply didn't work well around each other. Him repeatedly picking fights certainly wasn't helping. However, by the time we had all gotten genuinely sick of his ways, it was too late to give up. We had had our breakthrough, or rather Dusty had. The recording company and the manager we had started to work with had made it very clear that they wanted to have him in the focus. They had even scrapped our old band name in favor of Dusty's actual stage name, which I obviously won't mention here. With a sigh, I scribbled the words, "Dusty was an asshole," down onto the paper, right before crumpling it up and hurling the white, ink-smeared ball away from me with as much force as I could muster. I rested my head on the table and began to sob. After a while, I took another look at the last message he had sent in the band group chat. It had started with Nikki asking him how he was feeling about doing the meet and greet on his own. Nervous. That was his response. He had even capitalized the first letter, something I won't repeat here because it bugs me. I get that. A ton of people are going to be there. If you don't want to do it, you can still back out though. Nikki had told him. No, I need to come to terms with it. At that point I texted him a question mark. I've accepted it, he answered. I simply figured he was being weird again. You're giving a meet and greet, not attending your own funeral. Dusty sent a laughing emoji before adding, if I die, I'd want you to give a speech though. For real? I'm being serious here. I mean it. I die. You're going to do that. You're my best friend. I don't want anyone talking but you. I chuckled to myself. I'll give them a funeral speech they'll never forget, I responded jokingly. Thanks. That means a lot. Followed by a smiley face. You can probably see why I didn't take this very seriously at the time, but after it happened, I couldn't refuse, of course. In hindsight, it was so surreal. How could he have known that the security guard surrounding his small stage would be reckless enough for a single hateful young man to make his way through? The one who would kick him to the ground. That this would cause his waiting fans to panic and storm the stage, wanting to defend him from his attacker. That they'd overlook him trying to crawl away in their haste to get the other guy. That's what happened that day. He sustained multiple injuries around his head, chest, and abdomen. By the time they had finally managed to get him out of the crowd and rush him to the hospital, there was not much left any of the doctors could do to save him. I believe the cause of death was intracerebral hemorrhage, but I'm not sure anymore. All I know is that he succumbed to his internal injuries. This was what I thought about as I stared at my phone, tears blurring my vision, and then, suddenly, I heard a sound reminiscent of paper crinkling coming from the corner of the room. I slowly lifted my head and turned around, and there he was. He looked just like he did in the last picture I'd seen him in. His hair was gelled back, and his bright pink eyeliner was a stark contrast to his blue lips. He had straightened out the piece of paper on which I'd written the draft of my funeral speech, and his eyes were skimming over it intently. I could see his brows furrow when he reached the end. He lowered the paper and looked over to me. I wanted to scream. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was caught in that short moment of duress we experience so often when being confronted with something wrong. Something that shouldn't be, and I couldn't neither shout nor cry nor tremble. My mouth agape and my eyes wide. My mind tried to come up with a reason for this. For him. Either I was dreaming or hallucinating. So, I'm an asshole, eh? Dusty said in a monotonous voice. Why? Because I can sing? Because I look good enough for people to actually want to see me? You're dead, I muttered. I don't know how I could muster the strength to speak even as I did. My lips were quivering. I bet you're happy about that, he replied. No, I'm not, I stammered. But he didn't seem to listen. Don't get me wrong. I know you and the others hate my guts. I get it. Sucks for you. It's not like I'm thrilled it turned out to be this way. I'd have loved for you guys to be there with me all the way. But you heard what they told us. He dropped the paper and sighed. What would it have cost you to just be happy for me, Rogues? I kept my mouth shut. I wanted to talk back to him, but I was still half convinced that this man I was currently facing was nothing but a figment of my imagination. Instead, I just slowly shook my head and turned back to my phone. Look at me, Dusty demanded. This isn't real, I told myself. Suddenly, I felt clammy fingers wrap around my neck from behind. I gasped as he dragged me off my chair. The air was knocked out of me and my chest and chin harshly collided with the cold, hard floor. I screamed from behind gritted teeth as I realized I must have bitten my tongue hard when my jaws had slammed together by the impact. Tears were welling up in my eyes as I tasted the blood pouring into my mouth. I tried to heave myself off the ground only to feel a foot stomp on my shoulder, forcing me down again. Stop, please, I whimpered, turning my head to look up at my assailant. Dusty's face was contoured into a deep scowl. He stared at me for a few seconds before removing his foot from my back and plopping down on the floor in front of me. He didn't say a word, nor hint that he would punch or kick me again, so I hesitantly pulled myself up into a sitting position. I was careful to keep my head low, though, scared of angering him anymore. By then, I couldn't help but begin to accept that this wasn't only in my head. Either this was the most lively hallucination anyone had ever experienced, or the dead lead singer of my band had just beaten me up. I had to say something. One more minute of sitting in silence would be enough to drive me crazy. I wanted to ask why he was there, but it seemed such a hollow question. You knew it was gonna happen. How? Sometimes you just get this feeling, and you know something's gonna happen. I knew what it was, and well, that's it. That's impossible, I muttered, pausing to spit out the blood that was steadily trickling from my injured tongue. It was getting harder and harder to speak through it, and I wanted so bad to rinse my mouth and get relief of the burning pain, but I didn't dare get up. Well, obviously it's not, he replied, audibly expectorated. I quickly looked back down, resisting the urge to cover my head. This wouldn't have been the first time Dusty had hit me. Our arguments had often turned to violent in the past. This time, however, the aim had not seemed to be to put me in my place. It was almost like he actually truly wanted to hurt me. Why did you want to speak to me at your funeral? Because I want someone to speak their fucking mind. I thought you of all others. You were the most honest with me. You weren't afraid to rip me a new one when you wanted to. This is gonna sound messed up, but sometimes I'd even do shit just to tick you off. I liked fighting with you, he explained. I swallowed. I liked fighting with you too, I replied. He gave me a warm smile. Even after the big stuff started, you wouldn't lick my ass, not like the others did. But I did notice them being nicer around me. Even when I was being cranky, well, you didn't, and every time I was stressed, you were there, for me to take it out on you. You know, sometimes I thought maybe you knew, and maybe you were doing it to me as a favor. I wasn't. Yeah, well, now I know. But, see, deep down I always considered us to be friends. Guess I was wrong. He looked at me like he wanted me to tell him it wasn't like that. We had indeed been friends, but I couldn't bring myself to lie to him. Why didn't you back out when you knew you were going to die up there? I breathed. You just said it yourself. I knew I was going to die up there. I was going to. Death makes you smart, rogues. I know a lot I didn't before. For example, we all have a set plan for us, including our inevitable demise. Some of us unlucky ones get to know it before it happens. And I'm just grateful I didn't have to live with that knowledge for any longer than I did. Accepting it is difficult, but running away won't get you anywhere. It makes things worse, in fact. I don't know the details, it just does. He paused. Your fate is set in stone as well, just like mine was. What do you mean? You'll see. Suddenly he fell silent, his lips stretched into a worried grin. I wouldn't wish this knowledge upon any friend of mine, but since we've established that we're in fact nothing like that, I might let you in on it. I shook my head frantically. No, please don't. I had never thought about the afterlife. My life in general had never been subject to many of my contemplations, but I knew for certain that I did want to know how it would end. Dusty chuckled. Oh, don't worry. I'll leave your sorry ass none the wiser. You're gonna find out for sure someday, but it won't be through me. One last thing though. Be honest, do you miss me? I know we're not friends, but do you want me back? Like, would you have preferred if I hadn't died is what I mean. Yes, I replied, only to sputter out and spit more blood onto the floor. Wait, is that an option? He laughed and shook his head. Of course not, you dumbass. I just wanted to know. With that, he rose to his feet and walked over to the window, only to glance back once more. In that last moment in which he looked back at me, I saw them, the bruises, red and blue and yellow and blood. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone, leaving nothing behind but myself on the floor, still aching and sobbing. This all happened 3 years ago. I gave this speech. Of course, not one based on my initial draft, but one that I consider nicer. Honest still, but nice. I told the truth when I had said that I wished I had gotten to know Dusty better, and that I wanted him and I to be friends. Actual, close friends. For a long time, the remaining four of us, Nikki, Jamie, Marlo, and I, didn't really meet up again, or speak at all. Outside of our business-related manners, that is. We didn't really want to move on without Dusty. It would have been a senseless endeavor anyways. He'd been our face, our voice, our everything. He was the band. Things were looking like we really were about to break up. That was when I wrote the song. I won't name it here, nor will I write it out or anything of the sort. But it was the first song I'd ever written by myself. I'd helped Dusty, but the other songwriter we'd worked with in the past. But that'd been different. This song, I only came up with because I had been looking for a way to cope with how I felt about the band. About Dusty's death. About everything, basically. I'll spare you the details, but despite my reluctancy, the company picked up on it, and it was released as a single sometime later, with me as the vocalist. I hadn't expected to be so successful, as it turned out to be. To be honest, I didn't even think it'd be good at all. Unlike Dusty's, my voice is nothing special. It's deeper than his, more rugged and rough around the edges. I can't count all the times it broke when we tried to record it. Despite me not liking it at all, many others did, and that's how our band came to remain. For a while, I actually thought it was for the better. Nobody seemed to be the focus this time. We used our band name instead of that of any single member. We were doing it together. It was fun. Until I got into a fight with Nikki. He drunkenly accused me of pushing myself into the center and copying Dusty, trying to get all the attention myself. This couldn't have been further from the truth, but instead of walking off and talking things over once we'd been sobered up, I stupidly decided I had to beat him up for that. We ended up having to be separated. Neither of us had gotten away uninjured, but it was nothing seriously, mostly just our pride. We tried to have a proper conversation the following day, but I could practically feel his hostility towards me, so I was quick to end things there. That was just a few days ago. The start of our next bigger tour is due in 2 months, and I've been trying to reach out to him ever since, but to no avail. Something changed between us that night. I don't know for how long he's been harboring these thoughts towards me, but it feels like now that he's unleashed them onto me once. We're not going to be the same again that we used to be, nor are we ever going to be again. The thing is that Nikki called me yesterday and said that he wants to meet up with me tonight, somewhere private, where no one will bother us. I think I want Marlo to give my funeral speech. Either him or my sister, I haven't